Washington emptied out this month, not because the work was finished, because the fighting got too loud. The House of Representatives shut the lights off and left town until September. The Senate cut a deal 2 months early, which almost never happens. And in the middle of it, a Republican senator told Politico that his own party had turned into a circular firing squad. Not Democrats shooting at Republicans. Republicans shooting at each other. Semaphore put the same phrase in a headline on July 23rd. So here's the question nobody in Washington wants to answer out loud. What exactly did the president ask his own party to do that Republicans would rather flee the Capitol than say no to his face? Start with the thing that triggered all of it, because it is smaller than you think, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous. The president wants a national voter identification law, not eventually. Now, he said in his State of the Union address that Republicans in Congress should pass the bill before anything else. The House actually did it. On February 11th of this year, the House passed a strict voter identification bill, and the New York Times reported at the time that the measure had no realistic path forward in the Senate. That sentence is the whole story in miniature. The House gave him the vote. The Senate could not give him the law. But here is what most coverage skipped. The obstacle is not the Democrats. The obstacle is arithmetic. Republicans hold 53 seats in the Senate. Democrats and independents hold 47. Under the filibuster, most legislation needs 60 votes to even reach a final vote. 60, not 51. That gap of 7 votes is the entire crisis, and there is only one way to close it. You do not persuade 7 Democrats. You blow up the rule. Think of it like a lease on an apartment you share with someone you cannot stand. The lease protects you both. Right now you have the bigger bedroom, so the lease feels like a nuisance. Tear it up and today you get the whole apartment. But leases do not come back. The next tenant with the bigger bedroom will be your roommate, and there will be nothing left on paper to stop them. That is the filibuster. Senate Republicans understand this in their bones. And that is why the president's request landed in his own conference like a live wire. Listen to how they actually answered him, because none of this is anonymous sniping. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina said it plainly. He said, "I agree with the SAFE Act, but I'm not going to nuke the filibuster." Read that twice. He agrees with the policy. He will not pay the price. Senator John Curtis of Utah went further and said, the reason or method doesn't matter. It's breaking the filibuster. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska has said she opposes the bill itself. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the former majority leader, has opposed similar legislation in the past. Even Senator Eric Schmitt of Missouri, who supports finding a workaround, admitted the obvious problem. He said, "You'd have to have a deep commitment among almost all of our members." Almost all of them. That is the polite Senate way of saying it is not there. And the man in the hardest seat said it hardest. Senate Majority Leader John Thune of South Dakota told reporters, "It's not just me not being willing to do it. There aren't anywhere close to the votes, not even close, to nuking the filibuster." Then he added the part that should have been the headline everywhere. He said that idea is something that doesn't have a future. That is the majority leader of the president's own party telling the president in public on the record that the thing he is demanding cannot happen. Not that it is difficult, that it does not exist. And that's when it got worse, because the president did not accept the answer. According to Politico's reporting on July 23rd, the pressure campaign kept escalating, and Senate Republicans started openly defending Thune against their own White House. One Republican senator gave Politico the line that defined the week. He said, "I don't know who it was that sold the president on this idea that this was obtainable, but it's creating a circular firing squad for Republicans." Sit with that phrasing. Not "we disagree with the president," not "we have concerns." Somebody sold him something that was never for sale. That is a senator saying the leader of his party was fed a fantasy and that the entire conference is now bleeding for it. A second Senate Republican aide, granted anonymity by Politico to talk about internal party dynamics, described the pressure as, quote, just exhausting. And then that aide said something you rarely see printed. The aide asked, what leverage does he have over the Senate? And the answer the aide gave was that the president's political money is not moving. Politico reported that roughly $400 million is sitting unspent in the MAGA Incorporated Super Political Action Committee. The aide's blunt summary of the relationship was this: Trump doesn't care about Congress at all. Now, that is one anonymous aide, and it should be weighed as exactly that. Anonymous quotes are not gospel. But here's why it matters anyway. In Washington, the threat is the currency. A president with a war chest can promise a primary challenge and end a career with a phone call. If senators start whispering that the money is not coming, the threat stops being a threat. It becomes a suggestion. And senators who are only afraid of you are very different from senators who are afraid of you and believe you. Politico also reported that behind the scenes, the president is furious and that some allies believe the pressure on Thune will only intensify once the August recess ends. So this is not a story that resolved. It is a story that got postponed, which brings us to the exit. Because right in the middle of all this, the House of Representatives finished its business and left Washington until September. Officially, that is just the August recess. It happens every year. But reporting tied the timing directly to the internal temperature of the party. When your members cannot agree, the safest legislative strategy available is distance. You cannot lose a floor fight you never hold. You cannot be cornered by a reporter in a hallway you are not standing in. And here is where the story turns, because while everyone was watching the yelling, the Senate quietly did something that almost never happens in modern Washington. Something that, on paper, looks like unity. And once you understand why they did it, the yelling makes a lot more sense. On August 2nd, Senate leaders unveiled a bipartisan short-term funding bill to keep the federal government open. It funds federal agencies at current levels through December 11th, with a small number of exceptions. 2 days later, the Senate voted 89-4 to advance it. 89-4 in this Congress. Only 4 senators voted no, and they were an unusual group. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Now, why is that remarkable? Because of the calendar. The fiscal year ends on September 30th. Congress normally waits until the last days or the last hours before a deadline, then panics in public, then passes something at midnight while cable news runs a countdown clock. This time, senators acted 2 months early. That is not how this town works. That is a fire drill run before anyone smells smoke. Thune said passing the measure was his top priority going into the August recess, and he gave the reason directly. He noted that the American people have already lived through 2 record-breaking government shutdowns in the past 10 months. His line was short. We need to ensure that they do not face a third. He had asked Appropriations Chair Susan Collins of Maine to draft a bipartisan and clean funding extension that would carry the government past the November election. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York backed the approach, saying, "The bill allows us to continue negotiating a budget that won't leave working families behind." So Republicans and Democrats agreed on the calendar. And that is the tell. When the 2 parties suddenly cooperate early, it is almost never because they started liking each other. It is because they both looked at the same risk and got scared of the same outcome. A shutdown in the middle of campaign season punishes whoever is holding the gavel. And right now, that is Republicans. But here's the number that changes everything. Inside that funding negotiation, the White House submitted a wish list. In Washington, these are called anomalies, which is a bureaucratic word for exceptions to the rule that everything stays funded at last year's level. One request stood out. The administration asked for $1 billion in advance procurement money to begin buying parts for a new class of warships. They are called Trump-class battleships. That $1 billion did not make it into the Senate deal. Democrats pointed it out immediately. Senator Patty Murray of Washington said in a statement that funds for the new fleet were removed from the funding measure moving through the Senate. Breaking Defense reported the same thing plainly. The stopgap bill rejected the White House request for $1 billion for the battleship program. And now here is the part that should stop you cold, because this is not a partisan hit. Roll Call reported on July 27th that 3 Republican majority defense committees had already said the funding was premature. Their reasoning was not ideological. It was engineering. The ship is not yet fully designed. Read that again. The president's own party, holding the gavels on the defense panels, said you cannot buy parts for a ship that does not have finished blueprints. And then the Congressional Budget Office put a price tag on it. On August 5th, the Nonpartisan Budget Office estimated that building 15 of these battleships would cost about $275 billion. The lead ship, named the USS Defiant, was estimated at $23.4 billion by itself. Ships after it would average around $18 billion each. The New York Times reported that the projected cost of the program was likely to rise by 50% or more. $275 billion. For context, that is a number large enough that even in a Pentagon budget, it is not background noise. And the first billion of it, the small seed money, the easiest possible ask, the down payment, got cut by a Senate his own party controls. That is the real story of this month, and almost nobody framed it that way. The president did not lose a vote on voter identification. He lost something quieter and far more consequential. He lost the assumption of compliance. Because here is how power actually works in a legislature. A president is strongest when nobody tests him. The moment members discover that saying no carries survivable consequences, the price of defiance collapses, and defiance is contagious. First, one senator says, he will not touch the filibuster. Then another. Then a majority leader says, the votes are not close. Then 3 committees say a signature project is not ready. Then $1 billion vanishes from a bill with barely a fight. Each of those is small. Together they are a pattern. And patterns are what political professionals actually watch. Now let's talk about the fight underneath the fight, because this is the part that will outlive the battleship and the voter identification bill combined. Democrats have been warning for months about something that sounds technical and is not. It is about who actually controls federal money once Congress appropriates it. The Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. Congress decides what gets funded and how much. The executive branch is supposed to spend it. The concern Democrats have raised is that this administration would treat discretionary federal grant money as a political instrument, reward allies, punish opponents, slow walk funds to states and cities that push back. If that happens systematically, then Congress's spending decisions stop being decisions and start being suggestions. The vote still happens. The money just goes wherever the executive branch prefers. The White House position, through the Office of Management and Budget, which is the agency that controls how federal dollars actually flow, is that the goal is accountability and avoiding waste of taxpayer money. And in fairness, every administration says some version of this, and every administration means some version of it. Nobody campaigns on wasting money. But look at what Senate negotiators actually did about it. Reporting from the Hill described Republicans and Democrats negotiating the funding deal while working to curb new grant rules from the Office of Management and Budget. And Democrats say they secured language ensuring the administration cannot transfer funds from other programs to the Border Patrol. That is not rhetoric. That is a lock on a door, and you do not install a lock unless somebody has been trying the handle. Think about what that means. A Republican-controlled Senate wrote a bipartisan bill that quietly limits a Republican president's flexibility over money. Not loudly. Not with a press conference and a confrontation. In legislative text, where it is binding and boring and almost nobody reads it. That is how institutions actually defend themselves. Not with speeches, with paragraphs. And this is where it stops being about one president at all. Because none of this is new. This is a pattern with a history, and the history is the most useful thing in this entire story. Go back to the winter of 2018 and 2019. A fight over funding for a wall on the southern border produced the longest government shutdown in American history at the time. 35 days. Federal workers missed paychecks. Air travel started buckling. It ended without the wall money being appropriated the way the White House wanted. Go to 2020 and the fights over pandemic stimulus packages, where negotiations between the White House and Congress repeatedly collapsed and restarted over what to include and how much. Different subjects, same architecture every time. The executive branch demands, Congress resists, money becomes the battlefield. And each round, both sides learn something about how far they can push. What is genuinely different now is who is doing the resisting. In 2018, the wall fight was Republicans versus Democrats, with the president's party largely behind him. In 2026, the resistance on the filibuster came from Republican senators. The skepticism on the battleship came from Republican-led committees. The early funding deal was driven by a Republican majority leader who told reporters in public that the votes for the president's central demand were not close. That is a meaningfully different picture, and it deserves a meaningfully careful description. This is not a party in collapse. Republicans still control both chambers. They still vote together on most things. Thune is widely expected to keep his leadership post, and Politico reported that many in his conference believe he will secure another run as leader in November. What we are watching is not the end of anything. It is a boundary being drawn in real time by people who have to run for re-election in states where the president is on the ballot in spirit, even when he is not on it in fact. And that is the trap those senators are in, which almost nobody explains honestly. They cannot break with him. His voters are their voters. In a primary, his endorsement is worth more than any policy record. But they also cannot give him what he wants because ending the filibuster would strip their own party of its only defense the next time they lose the majority. There is no clever third option. There is only delay, which is exactly what August is. Delay. The House left. The Senate locked in funding through December 11th so that no shutdown crisis can be weaponized during campaign season. Everyone bought themselves 60 days of quiet. Nobody solved anything. So watch three things when they come back. Watch whether the pressure campaign on the voter identification bill returns with more force, as Politico reported some allies expect. If it does, the same senators will have to say no a second time in public closer to an election. Saying no once is a disagreement. Saying no twice is a position. Watch the battleship money. $1 billion was rejected in a short-term bill. Short-term bills expire. The full-year appropriations bills are still unwritten, and the Congressional Budget Office has now attached a $275 billion lifetime estimate to the program. That number will be quoted in every markup from now until it either dies or gets funded. And watch the money rules, the language limiting transfers, the fights over grant guidance from the Office of Management and Budget, the accountability argument versus the power of the purse argument. That fight has no natural end date because it is not about a program. It is about who decides. Here's the honest read, and I want to be precise because precision is the only thing that survives contact with a comment section. Nobody has been destroyed here. No party has fractured. There has been no collapse. What there has been is a demand that could not be met, an answer the president did not want, an exit from town rather than a confrontation, and a quiet bipartisan agreement to remove one of the White House's requests from a bill while adding limits on how money can be moved. In Washington, that combination has a name. It is called the beginning. The chamber comes back in September. The fiscal year ends on September 30th. The funding runs out on December 11th. The election is in November, and a president who was told by his own majority leader that the votes are not close has, by every account, not accepted that answer. Everybody in that building knows the second round is coming. The only thing still unknown is which of them blinks first and what it costs the rest of us when they do.